Welcome to the Deep Dive, the only place where we sift through the archives so you can sound brilliantly informed. Today, we're opening the books on a game that wasn't exactly a polished product. It was more like, an immense chaotic force of nature, The Elder Scrolls III, Morrowind.
And specifically, we're zeroing in on its journey to the console. This whole deep dive is really about this ambitious dream that was at the same time just an unprecedented technical nightmare, but it fundamentally shifted the entire landscape of console role-playing games forever.
Okay, let's unpack that decision, because when we talk about Morrowind hitting the original Xbox back in 2002, that was a huge gamble. High risk, high reward, almost bordering on, potentially company-ending fallout.
Yeah, absolutely. The tension around this release, it really starts way back on May 4th, 2001. That's when Bethesda Softworks actually announced they were porting their next gigantic high fantasy open world game to the new Microsoft Xbox. And to really get the stakes here, you have to remember what the gaming world looked like right then.
Right. Because RPGs, especially those big, sprawling, complex Western ones, they were strictly a PC thing, keyboard and mouse territory.
Yeah.
They demanded deep systems, lots of hardware power.
Exactly. The console scene back then, it was dominated by completely different genres, things optimized for controllers. You had platformers, racers, and especially Japanese role-playing games, JRPGs, think Final Fantasy, huge success, right? But they were generally linear, menu-based combat, very set narratives, often highly stylized worlds. They were contained experiences.
Yeah, very different. And then here comes Bethesda trying to cram this game built entirely on player agency, systemic complexity, first-person exploration, dozens of interlocking factions. The absolute essence of a PC Western RPG onto a console.
Yeah.
It just felt fundamentally, unfashionable for that audience at that time.
It was a massive technological gamble and a market gamble, too. They were basically trying to thrust this enormous high fantasy sandbox into a world where that kind of game had almost zero mainstream presence. And we know from the sources, the company's future was really riding on this. Todd Howard, the game director, he said it point blank since then. Morrowind's success on console is the reason Bethesda is still around today. The tension is just huge. So this deep dive, it's about uncovering how that incredible success actually sprang from such a colossal, risky technological bet.
Okay, so if the stakes were that high, why the Xbox specifically? Why not just play it safe and keep it PC exclusive?
Yeah.
You mentioned the OG Xbox hardware was key, suggesting it wasn't just a blind gamble, but maybe a calculated technical opportunity.
It really was a perfect storm, timing and architecture. The original Xbox, which came out in 2001, people often called it the PC in a box. And unlike the PlayStation 2 or the Nintendo GameCube, which had these very unique proprietary hardware setups, like the PS2's Emotion Engine, which was notoriously complex, the Xbox was built on pretty familiar PC parts.
What specifically made it feel like a PC then?
Well, it ran on a customized Intel Pentium III processor, and importantly, an NVIDIA GPU. For developers like Bethesda, who are primarily PC developers, this meant porting their engine was just significantly easier compared to, say, figure out a totally new, bespoke console architecture. Todd Howard saw this straight away. He called the Xbox the fastest system we've seen, and it's easy to develop for.
And the real ace up its sleeve, technologically speaking, was the hard drive, right? It was unique among the consoles at the time.
Oh, that hard drive was absolutely critical. For a game as massive as Morrowind, an open world of that sheer size, you need to constantly stream in assets, textures, models, sounds as the player moves around. PC games just do this naturally, using the computer's hard drive. But disk-only systems, like the PS2, they had to rely on much slower disks or these really complicated memory management tricks. The Xbox's built-in hard drive suddenly made that PC-style streaming viable on a console. It basically allowed Morrowind to exist at the huge scale Bethesda envisioned.
And Microsoft clearly knew what they had here. They saw Morrowind as a potential system seller, a killer app.
They definitely did. Jay Allard, who was the general manager of the Xbox division back then, he was apparently tremendously impressed by the sheer scope of what Bethesda was building. He even publicly said he believed Morrowind would be the only RPG of its kind on any future generation video game systems. Now, that's partly marketing hype, sure, but it was also genuine recognition that this game was pushing boundaries in a way that really only the Xbox hardware could support at that specific moment.
And to sell that idea, that generational leap, to the average console gamer, the marketing had to promise visuals that console players just hadn't experienced before.
Exactly. The marketing really focused on specific graphical upgrades that showed off the power of that NVIDIA GPU. They promised cleaner, more realistic textures, much higher polygon counts for more detailed character models and objects, larger, more complex environments. But the two things that really stood out in the promises were real-time shadows, that was usually high-end PC stuff back then, and a dynamic weather system, rain, ash storms, that added incredible depth and immersion. These features were really crucial in convincing console players that this wasn't just another game, it was a massive, living world.
The impact of that decision, bringing Morrowind to Xbox, it really echoes through gaming history. It wasn't just a port, it was pioneering.
It fundamentally paved the way. It proved there was a real appetite on consoles for these dense, complex Western RPGs built around player freedom. It absolutely blazed the trail for the huge mainstream success of its sequels, Oblivion and especially Skyrim.
And Bethesda was smart about how they positioned it for the average console buyer, someone who maybe had only played like platformers or JRPGs before.
Oh, they pulled off a genius bit of marketing translation there. They knew about another huge open-world pioneer at the time, Grand Theft Auto III. So they strategically slapped press quotes calling Morrowind a fantasy GTA 3 right there on the game box. That was a brilliant move. It linked this, somewhat unfashionable deep RPG genre with something console players already knew and loved, that feeling of open world freedom from GTA 3. They managed to bridge that gap beautifully.
But the success wasn't just about the hardware lead. It was really baked into the core design philosophy, which was just radically committed to player freedom. So now we're moving from that audacious technological leap to maybe an even more audacious lack of guardrails in the game itself.
The design was, it was uncompromisingly pure, you could say. The basic structure is single-player, freeform role-playing. Your character isn't predefined. They evolve constantly based on the choices you make, the skills you actually use during your adventures. And the storyline, it's completely nonlinear. Countless branching paths. It means the actual path through the game, the gameplay itself, things pretty unique to every single player.
What really leaps out, especially looking back from today's perspective, is that sense of totally unguided exploration. It genuinely raises the stakes for you, the player.
Oh, absolutely zero training wheels. You fire up almost any modern open-world game and bam! There's a giant compass, a mini-map covered in icons, waypoints telling you exactly where to go next. Morrowind. It demanded actual navigation. Real geography, almost. You relied on reading road signs, following directions someone scribbled into your journal, and crucially, you had to physically stop NPCs, passersby, and ask them for directions to the next town or that cave you heard about.
That makes the world feel incredibly real, doesn't it? You actually had to learn the routes, the landmarks, like exploring a new city in real life.
Exactly right. And the cities themselves, they were designed to reflect that realism, sometimes making them deliberately challenging to get around. Vivek City is the classic example. The capital, built on these massive tiered platforms, these cantons, inspired by Mesopotamian ziggurats. It's sprawling, labyrinthine. You didn't just walk in and instantly grasp the layout. You have to figure out, okay, which canton am I on? Which level do I need? Which bridge connects to where I want to go? That non-intuitive design was key to the immersion.
And this focus on, let's call it analog reality, it extended directly to how the game tracked your quests. The notorious journal.
Ah, the journal.
Wow.
Legendary. Infamous, maybe, but also kind of brilliant in its own way. There's no neat, tidy, searchable quest log like you expect today. No filters. Instead, everything, every piece of dialogue, every rumor you hear, every direction someone gives you, even summaries of quests you've already finished, it all gets dumped chronologically into this single journal. Which means, very quickly, it becomes what the sources call a jumbled mess of pages. Let's say you've played for 30 hours, you've picked up maybe 10 side quests along the way. Now you need to find that one specific detail about a cave location someone mentioned maybe 15 hours ago. Good luck. You're scrolling endlessly through pages and pages of irrelevant conversations you had with some guard about the weather.
That is like the ultimate anti-convenience feature. It forces you, the player, to pay attention, maybe even take actual notes. That's completely alien to modern console gaming.
It really does. The only truly effective way to keep track of things was, the way you track tasks in real life. You'd pull out a physical notebook, maybe a piece of paper, and actually write down the key details. Take the road west out of Balmora, go past the last Silt Strider transport, then turn north at the giant mushroom. It's this unique, almost analog element forced onto a digital game. It made you be truly present in the world, and it massively enhanced the realism.
And that sort of unfettered design philosophy, it carried right over into the game mechanics themselves, particularly the theft system. That allowed for some massive early game advantages, but it came at a huge cost.
The theft system was glorious. Gloriously broken, maybe, but also really dangerous for the player. Unlike a lot of modern games where valuable items might be locked behind unbreakable glass cases or just not physically interactive, in Morrowind, almost everything you saw in a shop was physically there. You could potentially take it.
So you could just walk into, say, a trade house, grab some high-level armor or a powerful weapon right at the start of the game.
You absolutely could try, but that freedom definitely came with consequences. You'd be marked as a criminal. If you were willing to embrace what one source called a fugitive lifestyle, yeah, you could quickly get your hands on vast sums of money and equipment that was far beyond the remit of someone as lowly and standing as yourself. But the trade-off, you'd have guards constantly after you, your reputation would be ruined in that town, maybe permanently. It was a genuine high-stakes choice with lasting impact.
That openness was so extreme, it led to some absolutely spectacular sequence breaking. The speedrunning community really shows just how few limits there were.
Oh, the numbers are just astonishing. World record speedruns for Morrowind have clocked in at under 4 minutes. Just think about that for a second. The sequels, Oblivion and Skyrim, even with their own exploits, they have slightly more structured beginnings, more scripting you have to get through. Their fastest completions are closer to 40 minutes. In Morrowind, you could literally just sidestep almost the entire main story, use crazy mobility exploits involving spells or items, and go take on the final boss, Dagoth-Ur, within minutes of starting the game.
That figure alone just highlights how much the game trusted the player not to completely break the experience, even when the physics and the systems were almost begging you to try. And the perfect story, the perfect anecdote for this kind of boundless, almost careless freedom has to be the Icarian flight scrolls.
Yes, the wizard who fell from the sky. You find this NPC dead on the ground, clearly misjudged something, and on his body you find these scrolls of Icarian flight. What they do is fortify your acrobatic skill to an absolutely ridiculous level for a very short time. So if you read one of these scrolls, get a running start and jump. The boost lets you leap just immense distances. We're talking potentially halfway across the entire continent in a single bound.
That must look incredible. Or maybe just incredibly foggy.
Mostly foggy, yeah. Given the original Xbox's pretty notorious draw distance limits, you were often soaring across this vast expanse of, well, white mist, and occasionally seeing loading bars pop up as the world tried to catch up beneath you. And of course, unless you timed your landing perfectly, or maybe got incredibly lucky and landed in deep water, you're likely to meet the same crunching fate as the wizard who made the scrolls once the spell effect wore off midair. But even that failure, that spectacular plummet back to Earth, it reinforced the game's core, beautiful, terrifying message. It showed players that, yeah, there really were no limits. You could physically break the intended scale of the world if you were bold enough, or maybe foolish enough, to try.
But this continent-spanning freedom, this lack of guardrails, it was precisely what made the game so brilliant. But it also demanded way more resources than the original Xbox hardware, even with its PC-in-a-box design, really had available. And that's where the true cost of that ambition started to show. So we're shifting now from the audacious design leaps to the almost desperate technical tightrope walk needed just to keep the thing running.
Yeah, this is where the tension really ramps up, because the very same ambition that defined Morrowind also introduced technical flaws so severe they were often genuinely game-breaking for players. Let's start with maybe the most astonishing technical trick they used to try and mask the hardware strain. Those infamous load times.
Oh, the load times were legendary. Sometimes a minute, maybe even more, especially going into or out of big, complex cities like Vivec or Balmora.
Yeah.
What was the secret behind those incredibly long waits?
It took years, but Todd Howard eventually admitted to this. Just radical, almost dangerous engineering decision they made. See, when the game was running critically low on system memory, which happened a lot in a massive, constantly streaming open world, Bethesda needed some way to basically flush the system's cache and start fresh, without crashing. Their solution. They would secretly reboot the original Xbox and the user can't tell.
Wait, hang on. They rebooted the console mid-game, like a hard reset without you knowing.
That's exactly right. That very long load screen that drove players absolutely crazy, that was actually the console itself rebooting in the background, just without going through the usual startup animation or showing the dashboard. It was a technical, dirty trick, really. It was necessary because the original Xbox hardware, while powerful for its time and PC-like, was being pushed way beyond its limits. It was likely suffering from memory leaks because of the sheer volume of stuff the game was constantly trying to load and track. It's an unbelievable admission, really. It just highlights the desperate measures they had to take just to get Morrowind to even function on the console hardware.
The sheer audacity of that, tricking the player into thinking a full console reboot, is just a long loading screen.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing. And this issue, the memory problems, it leads directly to that other infamous problem, the compounding performance degradation that plagued anyone who played the game long-term.
Right. The consequences for players who really dedicated themselves, who truly explored Vivardenfell for hours and hours, they were severe. The game suffered from performance issues and loading times that would just gradually degrade over time. The longer you played on a single save file, the worse it got. Why? Well, as the system memory kept running out, the Xbox was forced to rely more and more on its hard drive. Not just for streaming assets like it was supposed to, but as a kind of slow, inefficient replacement for RAM, like a virtual memory cache.
So, the more you played, the more you explored and did things in the world, the worse the game physically performed. Loading, frame rate, everything.
Precisely. It was like this high-stakes ticking clock hanging over every long playthrough. Our sources mention that if you logged hundreds of hours on the clock, those load times could climb to an absolutely agonizing upwards of 10 minutes. And the frame rate, which was already uncapped and pretty wild to begin with, would just drop like a stone during busy moments, like big fights or even just walking through crowded areas.
10 minutes. And that's enough time to make a coffee, read a chapter of a book, or completely forget what quest you're even trying to do when you entered that building. Did players really put up with that? Or did the game just become unplayable?
They tolerated it, mostly out of sheer love for the world and the game itself. But yeah, it was brutal. The sources draw a direct parallel between this slow degradation and the infamous memory issues that crippled Skyrim players on the PlayStation 3 years later, similar symptoms. But here's the crucial difference. Skyrim on PS3 eventually got patches that helped, somewhat. Morrowind on the original Xbox, it received no such fix. That was it.
And the performance slowly dying was only one part of the burden on the player, right? The sheer number of actual game-breaking bugs that were never patched on console meant players basically had to invent community rules just to survive, just to make sure their progress didn't just vanish into thin air.
It wasn't just playing a game, it felt like you were also doing save file maintenance as a part-time job. Rule number 1 was what the sources call the save crisis. Save files were just notoriously prone to corruption. You simply could not rely on having just one save file. Players quickly learned they had to maintain this complicated rotation of multiple backup saves, maybe 2 or 3 main files that they'd constantly cycle between, just in case their primary save suddenly decided to break and become unloadable.
And even simple things like leaving stuff lying around in the world could make those fragile save files worse.
Yes. The game's persistence, the fact that the world remembered where you dropped things, which was part of its freedom, became a double-edged sword, leaving doors open all over the place, or more grimly, leaving dead bodies and their loot on the ground instead of disposing of them. All of that would permanently bloat the save file. It would add data that the game had to keep track of, leading to even worse performance issues and longer load times down the line. The game essentially forced you to be tidy, to police your own impact on the world, almost treating your digital save like this fragile thing that could decay if you didn't handle it carefully.
And the ultimate irony, maybe, of the game's incredible freedom was that sometimes doing things too well, or maybe just too early, could actually destroy entire quest lines permanently.
That freedom really became a curse for proactive or just curious players. If you happened to stumble upon and collect certain quest items before the quest officially told you to go get them, they might not reappear later when the quest did start, which meant the quest was just broken, bricked. You couldn't finish it. For instance, there's a key quest involving the Urshalaku burial caverns. If you explored those caverns before you were explicitly sent there by the quest giver, the special quest bow you needed wouldn't spawn when you were finally told to retrieve it. Quest over.
So the game actively punished exploration and curiosity, in a way.
In some very specific, painful ways, yes. Another example, don't go into a place called Helene's Hut too early, or you risk permanently breaking a major quest line for the Mages Guild. Or, and this one got a lot of people, if you found a special quest item on a dead body, you had to take it right then and there, because if you left the area, left the body and the item behind thinking you'd come back later, poof! Both the body and the crucial item could disappear forever the next time the game loaded that area.
Wow. And let's not forget the really terrifying ways the game could just kill you. almost retroactively. That fortify health potion risk sounds like a complete nightmare.
Oh, it's the classic high-risk, high-reward alchemy exploit gone wrong. Players figured out you could brew these incredibly powerful homemade fortify health potions. You drink one, and boom, you've got this massive temporary health buffer, great for tough fights. But when that huge temporary effect wore off, you instantly lost all that bonus health. Now, if your normal base maximum health happened to be less than the amount of fortified health you just lost, you would just die unexpectedly for no reason, instantly. And the truly scary part, this could happen even if you'd saved the game after drinking the potion, but before the effect wore off. You basically saved your own future unavoidable death without even knowing it.
That is genuinely sadistic game design. Wow. But okay, the final, maybe most brutal glitch, the one that could permanently cripple your character's stats.
Yeah.
That involved vampirism.
The stakes here were absolutely maxed out. If you happen to be wearing any constant effect enchanted items, a ring that boosts strength, an amulet that fortifies intelligence at the exact moment you either contracted vampirism or at the moment you were cured of it, those temporary fortify effects from your gear could glitch out and become permanently subtracted from your character's base stats. Imagine losing 5 points of your core intelligence stat, or your strength, forever, just because you forgot to take off a certain pair of boots before talking to the NPC who cures vampirism. It's this incredible web of intricacy, freedom, and just fundamental, sometimes catastrophic failures. That's what made Morrowind on console so brilliant, so dangerous, and utterly unique.
But despite this insane tightrope walk of technical flaws, where the player basically had to become a part-time system administrator and bug tester just to survive, the audacity paid off.
Yeah.
Morrowind was a massive commercial triumph, a success that pretty much wrote the next chapter for Bethesda Game Studios.
It was a huge victory, no question. And that success on the Xbox console was absolutely the critical factor. We already mentioned Todd Howard saying point blank that the success is why the company is still around today. Commercially, it hit this really astonishing milestone. It became the second best-selling game behind Halo on the entire original Xbox platform.
Wow, that puts it in truly rarefied air. Foundational console titles. But beyond just the sales numbers, its lasting legacy seems rooted in this really nuanced narrative, one that kind of subverted the typical high fantasy chosen one story.
Yeah, the story starts off seeming familiar. You're a prisoner, lowest of the low, but surprise. You're apparently destined to fulfill this ancient prophecy of the Nerevarine, the great hero reborn. But the brilliance lies in how the game twists that. You quickly learn you're not the first person believed to be the Nerevarine. You are, in fact, just the latest in a line of maybe 5 or 6 previous candidates, who all failed, or died, or weren't the real deal.
So the central tension isn't just if you'll succeed, but how you navigate being potentially just the next failure on this long conveyor belt of prophecies.
Precisely. The game consistently undermines that whole concept of manifest destiny.
Yeah.
And the ultimate ambiguity of the ending, where you, the player, basically have to decide whether you even believe you are the Nerevarine, regardless of what the prophecies or other characters say. It makes the whole story much more profound. It becomes a narrative about the fallibility and faulty logic around faith, as one source puts it, rather than just a straightforward story about fulfilling a guaranteed destiny. That intellectual depth really elevated it.
The game systems themselves also seem to have enforced this sense of deep, permanent consequence, particularly the way you aligned with the different factions.
Oh, the faction system was groundbreaking, especially in its depth and, crucially, its permanence. It really set a standard that, frankly, a lot of subsequent open-world RPGs have struggled to match. So alongside the usual guilds you might expect, Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, Thieves Guild, you also have the 5 great houses of the Dunmer, the Dark Elves. These aren't just clubs, they're these massive, powerful, almost mafia-like families that control the politics, the economy, the very structure of Vardenfell society.
And what made choosing between these houses so significant?
The system forced you to make a sacrifice. There were 3 great houses you could actually join. House Hlaalu, House Redoran, or House Telvanni. But you could only commit to one of them, and once you committed, that was it. You were tied to that house for the rest of the entire game, which meant you were permanently locked out of joining the other 2 houses and experiencing their unique, sprawling, rich quest lines and storylines. Entire huge chunks of content just became unavailable based on that one choice. It was a really rare instance, even today, of an RPG being willing to make the player genuinely sacrifice access to significant parts of the game in favor of making one path feel truly meaningful and consequential.
That level of irreversible choice, it creates real weight, doesn't it? Moral weight, political weight for the player.
It absolutely does. And even within the standard guilds, that web of consequences was intricate and intense. Take the Fighters Guild questline. You eventually discover that your immediate superior is corrupt, and he starts tasking you with missions that directly target and harm members of the Thieves Guild. Now, you could just follow orders, but if you did some digging, you could find evidence of his corruption and eventually align yourself with an alternate guild master who wants you to take out the corrupt boss instead. But here's the kicker. If you took out the corrupt Fighters Guild boss, you permanently locked yourself off from ever completing a similar quest later for the Thieves Guild because, well, the target would already be dead by your hand. You were constantly closing doors, burning bridges, based on your actions.
And all of this political intrigue, this complex web of choices, it all took place in a world that felt just utterly alien and unique, defined by its incredible environmental design.
The world design of Vardenfell is just timeless and bizarre in the best way. It felt geographically tangible, real, despite being filled with things like pterodactyl-like cliff racers constantly dive-bombing you, giant luminous mushrooms that functioned as landmarks or even entire towns, and cities where the buildings were literally constructed from the hollowed-out shells of colossal ancient crabs.
I definitely remember the silt striders, those giant insect-like creatures used as organic public transport, ferrying you between cities. There was such a defining, weird, wonderful feature.
Absolutely iconic. The whole world just felt ancient, deeply weird, believable in its strangeness, and remarkably seamless. You could walk from the wilderness right into a city, generally speaking, once you got past that initial, often lengthy load screen, of course. And the enduring quality of that world design. Maybe the best proof is a surprising technical detail. 15 years after Morrowind came out, when the Elder Scrolls Online MMO released an expansion that returned players to Vardenfell, they actually used the exact same height map data as the original 2002 game. The topography, the mountains, the coastlines, they were identical, preserving that same geographical tangibility. That really speaks volumes about the artistry and the vision of the original design. Morrowind didn't just bring the Western RPG to consoles, it brought a world unlike any other, forever changing what publishers thought the console audience could handle and ultimately embrace.
Okay, let's fast forward 2 decades now. The Nerevarine has, in a way, returned thanks to modern hardware. The Xbox One X backwards compatibility program offers this really profound kind of modern redemption for a game that was, let's be honest, fundamentally an engineering compromise on its original console. We're entering the age of the fast dive, finally.
This is truly a night and day difference for anyone who actually suffered through playing Morrowind on the original Xbox hardware back in the day. Remember how we talked about the original game running with that completely uncapped, wildly inconsistent frame rate, full of those short, sharp stutters that made even just walking around feel jerky and unpleasant?
Hard to forget. It sounded like the console was just constantly gasping for air trying to keep up.
Well, on an Xbox One X, running Morrowind in backwards compatibility mode, that entire experience is just transformed. The game now runs at a reasonably stable 60 frames per second. Just think about the irony there for a second. The game that was once arguably the slowest, worst-performing console Elder Scrolls title is now, effectively, the fastest. It runs with a fluidity that was simply unimaginable on the original hardware.
And that incredible stabilization, that's purely down to the massive hardware upgrade, right? The sheer processing power of the modern console, the much faster back-compat emulator, and probably crucially the huge amount of RAM, like the 12 GB on the One X, just preventing those memory bottlenecks that plagued the original.
Exactly. And that speed directly addresses the second major affliction, the load times. Those original agonizing load times potentially climbing up towards 10 minutes in very long playthroughs on the OG Xbox, they are now radically faster on the Xbox One X. Loading saves, moving in and out of buildings, it just becomes much less tedious, as the sources put it. It goes from being a genuine coffee break to maybe just a quick sip of water. The whole user experience is just incomparably smoother.
And beyond just the performance boost, the visual upgrade is apparently pretty staggering too, especially considering the game's technical origins from 2002.
Oh yeah. The original Xbox typically supported 480p output that was designed for old standard definition CRT televisions. This is where the modern hardware really works some magic. On the Xbox One X, the resolution is boosted by an incredible factor of 16 times. 16. The resulting image is close to 2560 by 1920 pixels. That's effectively a near 4K vertical resolution being rendered.
Wow. So what does that 16x resolution jump actually look like in practice for a game that old?
It's genuinely transformative for the visual clarity. Distant objects, distant landscapes that used to just be this blurry, foggy mess, now they appear far sharper. Edges on buildings and characters are much cleaner. It makes the whole world feel substantially less fog-bound, more detailed. You can finally actually appreciate some of the intricate details in the architecture of the Great House cantons, for example, stuff that was previously just lost in the low-resolution smear.
Are there any visual downsides, though? Any trade-offs when you push a game designed for standard definition TVs all the way up into the realm of near 4K?
There are a couple of minor caveats, yeah. The user interface elements, the HUD, the text boxes, the health bar, they were all designed for that low SD resolution. The emulator just scales them up linearly, which can result in some noticeably blurry text and interface elements when you're looking at it on a sharp, modern 4K display. Also, some analyses suggest that the fidelity of ground textures right under your feet might actually take a small hit compared to the original rendering, possibly due to some adjustments in how textures are loaded. But overall, the net effect is overwhelmingly positive. It looks dramatically better.
Okay, but the biggest question, the one that really defined the high-stakes, long-term experience on the original console, that still remains kind of a lingering mystery, doesn't it? Has the modern hardware truly, finally solved that awful performance degradation issue? The 10-minute load times after hundreds of hours.
That really is the tension we're left with, isn't it? Because you can't transfer original Xbox save files over to an Xbox One or Series XS. You can't just load up someone's 300-hour OG Xbox save and see if it still takes 10 minutes to load. We'd have to replicate that playtime entirely on the new hardware, hundreds of hours of new gameplay. Now, we are cautiously optimistic. Given how much better the modern Xbox consoles handle memory management and storage access, it seems likely the issue is resolved or at least dramatically mitigated. But that definitive proof, it's still technically pending.
So even with this incredible hardware leap, this modern redemption, we still don't know for absolutely certain if that infamous, frustrating, game-breaking ailment of the original console version is permanently cured.
It really remains an open question. A challenge maybe for the brave few, as one source puts it, who choose to dive back into Morrowind and pile on those hundreds of hours on a modern console today. Will the immense hardware power finally prevent that critical memory leak, the one that forced the old Xbox hard drive to act as slow, makeshift RAM? The tension, in a way, remains high for any truly dedicated Nerevarine daring to save Vardenfell again here in 2024 or beyond.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive. A look into a game defined by just impossible ambition on one hand and frankly deep technological compromise on the other. Morrowind dared to drag the deepest, most complex kind of PC role-playing kicking and screaming onto a console. And in doing so, it arguably secured Bethesda's future and absolutely blazed the trail for the modern open-world games we play today. It feels like one of those rare cases where the game's biggest flaws, the bugs, the broken systems, those 10-minute load times, needing to constantly juggle save files, were somehow inseparable from its unique brilliance, from its unparalleled, almost terrifying freedom.
And I think that's the perfect takeaway, really. It's the core of that high-stakes design philosophy we've been talking about. Morrowind, especially on that original Xbox, was a dangerous game. It forced you, the player, to live inside a world that was full of systemic failures, full of risks. It demanded that you anticipate potentially quest-breaking actions, that you manage your save files like they were fragile physical objects, that you risk accidental death from your own alchemical creations. And what did you get in exchange for all that hardship, all that vigilance? You got truly unparalleled freedom and, maybe more importantly, a world of permanent, irreversible consequence.
The freedom to succeed spectacularly, sure, but also the freedom to accidentally break your own character or completely destroy your path through the main story.
Which really begs an important question, I think, especially when we look at modern open-world design. In this age of polished, heavily patched, aggressively waypoint-driven experiences, where everything is designed for maximum convenience, autosaves happen constantly, and developers seem almost afraid to let the player fail permanently. Are we maybe missing something? Are we missing that high-stakes thrill, that chaotic, maybe even terrifying joy of playing a truly beautiful, ambitious, yet fundamentally broken game? The very features that force Morrowind players to become these paranoid system administrators were, in a strange way, the same ones that made its world feel so alive, so unpredictable, so consequential.
Perhaps the struggle, the challenge of surviving a truly broken, dangerous game world is part of what makes finally succeeding feel so incredibly rewarding.
Indeed. That's definitely something to mull over. Perhaps the next time you boot up a brand new RPG and you immediately see that helpful, brightly colored arrow pop up on your screen pointing you straight towards your destiny, removing any need to ever get lost, or ask for directions, or decipher a scrappy, confusing journal ever again.